As for the sake of the younger people, stand for a few seconds to remember what happened 29 years ago. All of us. And just reflect when 1 million people are dead. I say so for you young Kenyans who are now toying with what may degenerate. May I say that? Many of you are young. In 1994, you have already been told for 100 days, between the month of April and the month of July, 1 million people were killed, and the world was silent. All institutions were silent. They only came back to help when the help was no longer needed. When the dead were dead, the raped were raped, property was destroyed. We are gathered here 29 years later to ask ourselves, on the basis of the question that has been posed to me, what is the role of governance in preventing genocide? And let me tell you, genocide is never too far from us in the post-colonial African state. The great American Pan-Africanist John Henry Clark said, and I agree with him, that when African countries regained their independence, almost all of them inherited a governance system that was inherited from the colonial powers in Europe, and he proceeds to say that none of the African countries will ever succeed on the mimicry of those systems. I can't agree more. We inherited systems which were alien to our very being. Your typical European states were monoethnic states. Belgium has 2 major nations, but they are never at ease. England, 3 nations, they are never at ease. Those at ease are the mono-ethnicities of Denmark or Norway or Finland. And I say this because your typical African state is multi-nation states. Nigeria, over 200 nations together. Kenya, over 46. Tanzania, 126. Having a governance system that creates an environment where the centrifugal forces are not allowed to fester is an act in governance which we must ask ourselves what can be done about. Today, many African countries are governing or are grappling with a concept called democracy. And what is this thing called democracy? Europe and America have succeeded in persuading us, particularly those of us who have gone to school, Western education largely, that democracy means multi-party, that we must have things called political parties, which in many African countries are formed on the basis of ethnicity. They have succeeded in persuading us that we must have periodic elections, where, as we say, the winner takes it all. And we have them. And when we have held those elections, the nations are under threat. If they are not under threat in Ethiopia, they are so in Kenya or Uganda or Tanzania or Nigeria, many countries. And I'm submitting to these august audience that governance has everything to do with creating an environment which irrigates the factors that contribute to genocide. Those who know, particularly you young ones, may not know that the situation in Rwanda which led to the genocide was one that was capable of prediction. That it was clear that a critical, significant minority of the Rwandese community felt excluded. So you could hold many elections, declare many winners, but resident in their hearts and minds was dissatisfaction. What you needed was a trigger and an enabler. And I'm suggesting to us, those of us who are here, that we in the African continent must never forget that our nations are very young. Ghana, which is the oldest post-colonial state excluding Liberia and Ethiopia, is only 66 years of age. But even in those countries, you will always hear dissatisfaction. The countries are always under stress. And the questions that we are asking in this forum are practical questions. This is not a forum for intellectualization, moralization, or philosophization. It is a forum for asking ourselves how we deal with practical issues. You must remember that the post-colonial state was also designed to fail. Because the failure of the post-colonial African state is a multi-billion industry for the former colonial entities. You must never forget that. Don't be cheated, don't be deluded that the colonial states want Africans to succeed. If African countries succeed, how will they get your gold? How will they get your coltan for nothing? How will they dominate you? How will they make their currency to dominate your currency? How will you remain hewers of wood and drawers of water for their civilization? We must never be diplomatic about those issues. And that is what I'm telling younger Africans present in this forum. That genocide is never too far from any of our countries. Look at what is happening in Nigeria now. Profiling of either the Igbo or the Yoruba. Look at what happened in Tigray in Ethiopia. My ambassador in Somalia is here. Look at what is continuing to happen there, the struggle. Once the centrifugal forces have taken charge, it never comes back. Not so easy. My ambassador from Mozambique is here. He knows what I'm talking about. My friend from Eritrea is here. He knows what I'm talking about. My friend from Rwanda is here. They have healed 29 years, but the project is not complete. It is work in progress. So today, we are here to remind ourselves of a number of things. That the salvation of the post-colonial African state not only requires but demands that particularly those of you who are in authority remember that Africa has to revisit our governance structures. I'm no longer convinced that the Eurocentric models we inherited are sustainable in the continent of Africa. I'm no longer convinced. Number two, I'm no longer convinced that African countries operating as solo individual countries have the strength to withstand the tsunamis that are being unleashed from other parts of the world, that we must now move towards working as one unit. I'm not convinced that little Lesotho, little Eswatini, little Rwanda, little Burundi are viable. I'm saying that going forward, we must begin to ask ourselves how we strengthen ourselves within the East African region to immunize ourselves against the diabolical machinations from within and without. And that it should be happening in East Africa, it should be happening in Southern Africa, in Western Africa, in Central Africa, in the Horn, in the Maghreb, and ultimately have an Africa that speaks with one voice. I'm also convinced that we should have systems of governance that de-emphasize our difference and emphasize our common factors so that the economic environment is suitable so that nobody feels excluded. Easier said than done, but it is an intergenerational project that we must work towards. I can say more, but I believe that question and answer session will allow for people to tease out some of the critical issues. I beg to rest.
Hard to follow Professor Lumumba, but that was fantastic. A lot to mind.